What do you think it is to live a good life?
If you and your partner are always thinking the same thing, then one of you is probably not necessary.
It's living presently for other people with an understanding of what's to come.
If I don't take this step, it's going to be okay. Like, we're not playing with Monopoly money.
If you were writing your obituary today, what would it say?
So I think we, as created beings, no person on earth has ever created themselves. I think we take on the image of our creator, and our meaning comes from the one that's made us.
Yep. All right, I want to start off. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, man. The best advice I've ever received? I don't know that there's one piece of advice that I've received that it's like, I'm going to hang on to that forever. Like, I think in the moment, sometimes I'll hear someone and be like, oh, yeah, I do need to hang on to that forever. I don't know if that's actually the case. A good piece of advice that I received recently was just on patience. Thinking about work and just like thinking about the timing of like making a purchase or of taking another big step that's like, okay, that could be a real needle mover. And it was just be patient. Like this whole process of work and trying to accumulate or work for money, which is what you have to do to survive, but it's also something that we kind of strive to do, hopefully in a healthy way. But it's like, just be patient. Like, it can't hurt to wait another quarter before you make a big swing. So it wasn't like a one quote that was like, oh man, I really need to hang on to it, but it was just the idea of like, if I don't take this step, it's going to be okay. Like, we're not playing with Monopoly money, so it's maybe better to be patient than to, jump in too fast. So that's something that I've been very grateful for the last month or so. Just a conversation of like, maybe wait. If it was as good of a deal as you thought it was, you would have purchased that business, 2 months ago. It's like that. So that was that. I guess that is more of a quote, but yeah. So very grateful for that recently. One on marriage that stuck with me from my internship in college. So I have sat with this one for a while. But Rich Miles was my boss at Capstone Business Advisors during college, during that year and a half that I was there. And Mary and I were dating at the time when he said this. And I don't think he was thinking just about dating, but he was saying this about he and his wife too. But he's like, if you and your partner are always thinking the same thing, then one of you is probably not necessary. I was like, shoot. Yeah, like I want Mary and I to always be aligned and not have friction. Like, don't want to have to work through hard things or where we think or feel differently. But I have come back to that one a lot. And it's brought me a lot of reassurance that when we're having a hard conversation, it's like, this is good for us. It's good for me. I hope it's good for Mary. But it's good for our relationship that we're not always thinking the same thing.
Yeah. Worst advice you ever received?
Worst advice. Yeah, again, I don't know that there's one that sticks out. I think bad advice often comes from like making a huge generalization, where it's like, like things are always this way or things are never this way. I think that's when advice can get bad. Yeah, because like context just matters so much. And so I don't know. I don't love, I guess, advice that's not maybe hedged or doesn't have any context with it. And I think some people kind of walk around there, might have a saying where it's like, things are always this way. And it's like, nah, I'm pretty skeptical if someone talks that way. Yeah. What about you? What's some of the best advice that you've received and held on to for a while?
Yeah, best advice for me is that fear is never as scary as you think it is.
Mm-hmm.
and that you're going to regret not taking risk.
Mm.
Like life is all risky.
Yeah.
Like me waking up today and getting in my car was risky. So I'm taking risks every day, but I'm scared of the risk that, oh, what if I do this and fail?
Mm-hmm.
Or what if I don't have something to fall back on if I take the leap? Or when you're dating someone, well, it's risky to get married.
Yeah.
Like everything you do is risky no matter what. Life is all risky. And so why is it that my dreams are the riskiest? Why can't I just jump into those? And if they don't work out, worst thing, you fall to a 9-to-5.
Yeah.
At least in my scenario. Sometimes it's worse, but in my scenario, it's like worst case, I still am just doing the same thing I'm doing today, even if it doesn't fail, or even if it does fail.
Yeah.
So that advice of just pushing boundaries of fear and how fear is oftentimes telling us where we can probably push our boundaries. Because for me, fear, outside of life-threatening experiences, fear has always been, that's probably my opportunity for growth, is where I'm afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said this in one of my other YouTube videos recently, but there's this large study done with tens of thousands of people. And they polled what their top 5 fears were. Number 2 was the fear of death. Number 1 was the fear of public speaking.
Yeah.
So when people say, I would rather die than public speak, they mean it.
Yeah. That's great.
And that's one of those where I'm like, that feels like a boundary I can push.
Yeah.
Because that's something I can work on. Death, I don't know if I should push that boundary. But public speaking, I shouldn't be afraid of that. So that advice has been really good because whenever I'm afraid to take a step or take a leap in a direction, I always think, is this because I'm afraid or anxious about what might happen? Or is this just because I'm too much of a wimp right now? And that's just how I talk to myself. Like, dude, you can do it. Pick up your bootstraps and do it.
Yeah.
So that's good advice. Worst advice? Man. I think never change is the worst advice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a blanket statement where it's like, yeah.
Yeah, I think people, and it's said in jest, especially when you're with friends or with family. It's like, oh, dude, like, never change, man. You're awesome. And people say it so facetiously, but I think they say it because they don't want to lose the person that they see in you. Like, oh, dude, you're so funny. I'd rather you stay the funny person. Dude, you're so thoughtful. I always want to make sure that you're thoughtful around me.
Yeah.
And yet that idea of change, a lot of people don't want you to change because they want you to stay the version of them that keeps them comfortable. And they don't want to see the next version of you.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's probably the worst advice I've received.
Yeah. Nah. Yeah. It's that idea just sounds like it's rooted in fear, which was, kind of what your first piece of good advice was kind of like pushing those boundaries of fear. And the other one is like, just kind of the complete opposite. Right. Yeah. No, that's good. I think similarly, like bad advice could be like, very, very similar to your idea of bad advice was like not never change, but like always be yourself. Like I think that can.
What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a lot of good in that. I think there's a lot of, good intentions, but it's like, if you're just always following yourself, well, you're often pretty easily manipulated by your environment or, whatever you're learning, whatever you're taking in, the people around you, the work that you're doing, how much food you've eaten that day, how much you've exercised, what you've listened to, what you're seeing. Like, and so if you're just always yourself, just kind of letting your emotions or kind of your environment, just shape your desires, like that'll just take you to some bad places. So
Whenever I hear be authentically you, I also hear, and there are no consequences for that. When, like you said, well, authentically me just wants to eat Taco Bell every single day for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
When I'll probably die at 50 of a heart attack if I do that. Maybe even sooner.
Oh yeah.
Like, that's not a good habit to have. It's not a good behavior to have, but I don't know, man.
Yeah.
So what does it even mean to be authentically you?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like looking at society, there is the sense that there shouldn't be any consequences if you're just being you.
Yeah.
And that does lead down to paths that now we're seeing, especially with the trans movement and all of that stuff. Like people have transitioned and now they want to transition back. And there are so many problems that have occurred because of that, because their environment shaped them and molded them to believe this was the way I need to go. Now they're older and they realize it wasn't. And this wasn't me. This was just the environment shaping me, or someone told me I needed to be a certain way. And that wasn't actually authentically me.
Yeah. I think probably the intention behind a quote like that is like, I think it's similar to what we've been saying, is like try not to live out of a place of fear, but from a place that is one of peace, one that's relational. Like it's hard to have relationships with people that aren't themselves, that where it's like, dude, I can see that you're really trying in this relationship, or I don't know, where it's like hard to get a read on someone, or it feels like, yeah, you can never know what they're thinking, or you don't know if they're giving you honest feedback, things like that. So I get the intention behind it, but for it to be that blanket statement of like, just always be yourself. It's like, I mean, everyone that knows themselves, it's like, there's plenty of good in there, and there's plenty of stuff where it's like, I'm working on something, and so I shouldn't always be doing the thing that I'm trying to work out of my life, or, so I don't know. Yeah.
I do like that statement because it does kind of give you the autonomy to say you do have the ability to author your own life.
Mm-hmm.
I think that as a Christian, we have the choice to be autonomous and behave how we want underneath the lordship of Jesus Christ and the morals and authority that he has.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that piece of it.
Yeah.
When there is the structure of here are kind of the values you should live with, along with being authentically you.
Yeah.
Because we're already authentic. We're already one of one. We're already the original. But when that original gets distorted by sin, we're not actually being that authentic.
Yeah.
We're just being sinful.
Yeah. That's good stuff.
So what do you think it is to live a good life?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not one that's easy to answer, right? I feel like that's one that everyone wants to know. Yeah, it's one that's been talked about for probably since the beginning of time. It's like, how do we deal with the discontentment that we experience? I don't know. Do you have any easy answer? You have one that you've been doing this for who knows how long now, but I'm sure that's not the first time you've asked that question to yourself or to someone else.
Yeah, I mean, the question in the book I'm writing that I'm trying to answer is, how do we make sure that our one life matters? And what does it look like to shape and structure your life to where you know that it is going to matter in some capacity?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a piece to living a good life is living presently. Tomorrow's not guaranteed, and yesterday can't be relived. So there's that idea of living presently. And I think that we see that in the Bible with Jesus. Like, he is always with people. Another piece of it is understanding the overall vision of where you want life to be, how life is going to go, also how Jesus lived. There's also another piece that we understand and can glean from the past, but ultimately the past is not going to save us for what's going to come in the future. So I think a piece of it is, how do we make this life matter? How do we live a good life? It's living presently for other people with an understanding of what's to come. And so I think living a good life is really value driven. Like, how can I be kind and serviceable today? How can I be thoughtful and understanding today? How can I make sure I am loving the people in front of me today?
Yeah.
So that's like the pieces of it. I've thought about it a lot. So that sounds like an easy answer, but that's hours and hours of thinking. But I think that's at least a piece of it,
Yeah.
is making sure that we're living presently. But what do you think?
Yeah. So you had like 4 or 5 really good bullets there already. So yeah, you've got a good answer to that. Yeah, I don't know. The two things that come to mind quickly, I guess, from like a bullet point perspective are peace and love. Like there is a level of your life that is rooted in love. So like you're not afraid of people and the things that you're doing. Like you're not driven by fear, but you're driven by love, and there's peace in your life. Like there are people that live out a life of love and peace that have significantly less material gains or opportunities or comforts in the world. So there's people that live that love it. Like I just think of like my grandparents, for example. Like my grandparents never accumulated a whole lot, but still like there's an abundance of love for people, for our family and for others. And there's also a sense of peace. It's like, didn't need to accumulate anything to have the relationships in my life, you know? And so that is very inspiring. And then there's also people that have an abundance of things, that have an abundance of wealth, and that also live out of love and have a sense of peace. And so I think kind of on both sides of that spectrum, and that spectrum can go much bigger than what I just described. And, you know, like when I'm thinking about people that have an abundance of stuff, like I'm thinking about someone like Brandon Turner, who's a real estate guy that I have learned a lot from afar, and just kind of got to see the life that he's lived, and or at least the life that he's put out on YouTube and books and social media and podcasts and stuff, you know, and there's people much wealthier than him, and there's people much poorer than my grandparents. Like my grandparents, I'd say, are fairly middle class. So, but I feel like those two components are absolutely necessary, and we can riff on either of those things, peace and love, for hours. Like, okay, well, where does that peace come from? Where does that love come from? Like, how do you fight off fear? How do you, yeah. So, but I think those are maybe the two most essential things in my head that for living the good life.
Yeah, I heard a quote, and that quote said, you shouldn't think that God is blessing someone just because they have wealth, just because they have material possessions.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a sense that that person has a lot more. Why is God blessing them and not me? Or your parents are fairly middle class. Brandon Turner is wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why did God bless him more or less? And that's not the question at all. Just because someone has more wealth doesn't necessarily mean God is blessing them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good reframe. Maybe that's where that peace comes from, that perspective shift.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah. There's plenty of times where we see God bless people materially.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also plenty of sentiment where it's like, why does evil prosper? You know, like people where it's like, oh, that CEO, that company that's so big had an affair and we learned wasn't a good father and burned a lot of bridges in their work, but they're a bajillionaire, you know. So yeah, I think both this thing, it's just hard to discern. You don't know always where God has intentionally blessed someone, like he did with Abraham or Moses or David and Solomon and so many others. You know, like why did God use a material blessing in that person's life for their sake and for the sake of others, and then why did that person accumulate so much when they were just a terrible human being? So
yeah. You know, I've been told this is a controversial take, but I think that every single decision that we have is either a life decision or a death decision. Because ultimately, in the end, we're either pursuing towards a life path or pursuing towards a death path. And I think that each decision we get to wave that trajectory. And even when we are saved, like if I go get baptized and I accept the Holy Spirit, but I don't change my ways, I don't necessarily think that I'm actually going to be saved in the end. Like the Bible is very clear that your actions have to be the thing that shows it.
Yeah.
You can profess with your mouth that you knew me, but when you get to heaven and you say, Father, I knew you, I'm going to say I didn't know you.
Yeah.
Because you didn't show it. So even that professing isn't enough. And I don't think it's a coincidence that evil spelled backwards is live, because it's the opposite of that. It's death.
Yeah.
So I think that every decision we're making is life and death. And it doesn't have to be that weighty, but sometimes it does. It's that existential thought of, is what I'm doing actually pursuing life, pursuing what Jesus wants, or am I pursuing my own fleshly desires?
Yeah. Is that where the quote on your wall comes from, that idea? Like,
I guess that's right here.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think no matter what, if you want to find meaning, and I think meaning, my definition of meaning is the essence to understand something. Like it is that grounding of, because people ask, what do you mean? That means I need to give you the essence of it for you to understand in either a different light or a better way. So I think just to create the essence to understand life, to create meaning in life, you have to take action. Because I can sit here all day and think, oh, that would be a great idea. That'd be a great idea. Starting a podcast would be awesome.
Yeah.
Making a website would be great. Doing that song would be awesome. I can think that all day, but that's not meaningful.
Yeah.
It's just a thought. So there is action that you have to take to actually impact and inspire the world.
Yeah. No, that's good. That it makes me think of the Hebraic word yada that is used when like Adam knew Eve. That word to know is yada, and it's used throughout Scripture in a bunch of other, relationships and ways. Like, but it's to know experientially. It's a type of understanding that can only come through experience. So it's yada is not knowing someone by conversation or knowing someone by, like, I guess, seeing, but it's like knowing someone by experience. Like you're kind of in it together. Like you're getting to know people through experience, and I guess that husband-wife language that God tries to use with himself and his people. In marriage, it's pretty clear. It's like, oh yeah, your spouse in a different way than anyone else. And yeah, so that I really like that meaning found in action. It's like not just the ideas you take. Yeah, it's not all up here, but it's like, okay, I can feel that understanding in my body. Like there's a level of comfort, or there's a level of wisdom, like maybe discomfort that came from experiencing something where it's like, I don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. How do you think people change?
Yeah. How do people change? Yeah, I don't even know if I'm qualified to answer that question. Like,
I mean, I assume that you've changed at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think whether it's changing in a good way or changing in a bad way, like becoming the person that you want to become, or just becoming the person that you already are to a deeper extent, like it's through your actions, and hopefully your actions are influenced by better and more, like more helpful information. But it's like, if I were to sit in an office desk all day long and do the job that I'm already doing, and I do it for the next 50 years, that'd be sweet. So that means I'd be 77. So that'd be cool just to live that long. But if I were to do that, physiologically, I'd probably start to get a little pudgy. If I were to be sitting in a chair 8 hours a day, like my action is sitting and I'm still doing a job, like there's other ways to add value and stuff, but like sitting there for that period of time, like my body's going to start to change by doing the same thing day after day after day. And it would be changing in a way that I don't want to change. But yeah, sitting's the new smoking. So my body would change by doing that same thing over and over again. Or if I realize being overweight's not healthy, and I want to live a good long life with the people in my life, then hopefully, information that I've taken in about health and any advice I've gotten from my doctor, it's like, okay, well, I need to live an active life. Even in elementary school, they're like, play for an hour a day. It's like, okay, well, probably need to get regular exercise. Probably need to be moving.
Yeah,
even if I work a desk job. So
yeah, the old Play 60 TV breaks they used to have.
Yeah.
I don't know if you experienced those, but
the propaganda, from the government.
I felt like that was good.
No, it is.
That was one of the good ones.
Yeah, it is.
Get active.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a daily action.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's an analogy that I'll share with you that I've kind of developed, and I call it the light switch analogy.
Okay.
So I hear people often say that I wish I could just flip a switch and everything would be different. Everything would be perfect or fixed, whatever. But let's say that right now the room is not how you want it to be. Think renovating a house.
Yeah.
When you buy a house and you see that you need to renovate it, what do you need to do first? You have to go in and clean out everything in there. You have to get everything out.
Yeah.
And then it's an empty room. And sometimes the lights don't even work. But you have to work in the dark day after day to build it how you want it. And then eventually there is a light switch moment. But that's for the other people to see that, wow, this is great. This looks awesome. And for them, they're just experiencing the newness of it. But you know that you built in the dark. And that's how change is. It's building slowly in the dark every day to get to where you want to be, knowing that you have that vision of what it's going to look like or who you'll be, and remembering that here's why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So that you do get that light switch moment. It's not as quick as you want it to be, but you get it.
Yeah. No, dude, that really hits hope. Definitely have experienced that with our own house. And on the other side, even walking in here, I'm like, dude, this setup looks different. It looks even better than last time. Last time it was cool. And this is even more, next level, production. But it's like, I didn't see all the decisions, all of the reviews that you read on cameras and microphones and lights and everything. But it's like, I walked in here and I'm like, dog, you've got an awesome setup. So I kind of experienced that light switch on the other side where it's like, oh, that was really easy, right? Yeah. Probably not. Probably took a lot more work.
Yeah, even that physical fitness. If you're obese now or you're not where you want to be, really 90 days of dedication will get you there. But it's that every day being dedicated.
Yeah. It's good stuff. Yeah. I guess you're saying the same thing. Yeah. People change by action. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't have to wait for some big moment to change. I feel like sometimes people's stories of change is this big thing happened where it was a death or a marriage or I found out something I didn't want to find out and that's why it changed. You don't have to wait for that. You can choose to change tomorrow. Going back to the whole, you're still the author of your life story. You can choose to change, hopefully to live in a good and healthy and beneficial way to society. But it doesn't have to be. I think people use the big idea as an excuse sometimes to say, well, I wish I had a reason to change. You don't need a reason. If you want to change, you can change.
Yeah. No, growing up, hearing people's story of coming to faith and it's like, oh, I used to be this crazy drug addict that lived a life of sex, drug, and rock and roll. And now I love Jesus really radically. And I don't do all the things I used to do. And from afar, it's like, you don't do all the things you used to do. And it doesn't seem like you have to think about money and your life seems really, really content, but and also crazy radical. You're evangelizing to a bunch of people, making great disciples. It's like, that is such big extremes. And I wonder how many people go through that, like out of 100 people, it's like how many people have like these radical life changes versus how many people more so just change really slowly over time. Yeah, because the radical stories are the ones that are typically most inspirational. And I'm not entirely sure why, but it'd be interesting to know if there's any statistics on that, like how many people have like one moment where it's like, oh, their life was forever changed versus, people that it's like, oh yeah, these ideas just built and built and built, and these habits built on someone's life, and they became the person they really were hoping they would be 20 years down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of it like a cycle and how those big moments sometimes break the cycle because what used to be can no longer be. Because we're so comfortable sometimes in our cycles, those big moments break it up because now that cycle can't go on anymore because something has radically shifted. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's the emotion factor. That's a good question, though. If you were writing your obituary today, what would it say?
Yeah. Dude, I've heard that question a couple of times, not posed to me, but I guess I've had to think about it a little bit because I've listened to other people talk about it. And this is wild. Just was listening to someone the other day talk about the guy that invented dynamite. His nickname was the Merchant of Death, and someone misprinted and accidentally wrote an obituary for him thinking that he had died when it was in fact his brother had died. And so people thought that the Merchant of Death had died and there was an obituary about him, and he was like in his 50s, and he was like reading this paper and was like, oh shoot, I need to change my story. Like, I don't want to be known that way. And so he ended up becoming the person that founded the Nobel Peace Prize. Like what a change in trajectory and what he was known by other people, and also how he thought of himself, I'm sure changed a lot in that process. So that was just a cool recent thing kind of attached to this. Yeah, I think the things in an obituary, similar to your question about the good life, that I would really hope could be said about me by the time that I die. Like, I don't know if this is what would be said about me now. Like, I just don't know what other people say. But I would hope that I would be known as someone that loved people really well. Like, it was clear that I was intentional in the small conversations, and like you were saying, that word of presence, like, very much goes along with that desire that I've got, to be intentional, and that being present, intentional, whatever, would be out of a place of love, and that I would have a sense of peace about me that is different, peace that's not consumed or worried by the things that, we all worry about. Like, there are things that I worry about now that I hope I don't worry about, by the time I die, where it's like, I have worked through that, where it's like, I have enough, I am enough, I've done enough. Like, I would hope for a sense of peace in my life that can only come from walking in the rhythms that God intends us to walk in. And that's coming from a place of rest, a place of deep relationship and knowing our Creator and each other. Yeah. And then I also have a desire that would be a person that's wildly generous. I don't know. I don't even understand why I have that desire, because I don't think everyone has that desire. But it's somewhere in my DNA where I want to be someone that is really generous, generous with my time, generous with my money, generous with my home. I want to be a person that's, I guess, living from like a place of abundance, even if I don't have, generational wealth. that like don't need to build something like the Rockefellers, but with whatever I have, I hope I'm generous.
Yeah, the generosity piece. I mean, that's where true impact comes in, right? Like when I think of people who have died, at no point is it, man, this guy, he owned like 6 cars. His house was like 10,000 square feet. That's typically never said. It's always, how did they impact the community? How did they impact their family? How did they impact financially? How did they impact with their time, with their effort? It's all about impact. So I like that.
Yeah.
And in that impact is where legacy is left. Now, you can have generational wealth, but if you have all this money and you don't teach those after you how to steward it or set up the parameters of how to steward it, that could actually be a worse thing than a good thing.
Yeah.
And we've seen that happen throughout history. You know, like kings and queens. Oh, this guy was really great. Their son kind of stunk. Like, he was not great.
Yeah.
Or the Rockefellers or the Vanderbilts. It's like these people, their families don't have that same wealth within their family anymore because throughout the generations, it slowly became like people weren't taught how to steward it. They weren't taught how to do it. The impact was less. So.
Yeah. Yeah. On a walk the other day, what is today? Today's Wednesday. So this was on Monday. I just met a random lady that her and her husband had a bunch of rental properties and they live in a very nice part of town and stuff. And they're going to sell their massive house and downsize and still be in a really nice part of town. But she was just talking about how her kids had moved away. Like she had 3 or 4 kids and none of them lived in Nashville anymore. And none of them wanted to take on the rental properties probably when they end up, I guess, probably passing away and needing to work through everything. I'm probably just going to sell it all so they can do whatever they want with the money. And she's like, it just seems like the fairest thing to do. It's like, yeah, and it probably is. Like, that's probably the fairest thing to do with kids that don't want, to either manage or find someone else to manage those properties. But it's like, those kids probably have the opportunities that they have because of the investments that their parents made. And so for their kids to not want the rental properties is crazy. But, yeah, just blows my mind that it's like, why didn't you teach them? Like, why did you teach them how good of an investment that is, or just, why you ended up doing the decisions that you did so that your kids, could follow in your footsteps, not because you got everything figured out, but it's like you figured something out. So, yeah. What about you? What's a couple things in your obituary and be like, oh, I'd be pretty content to know that.
Yeah. I think an obituary really boils down the values that someone lived out. And there's always the obituaries where it's like, oh, like he was a nice guy, he was a good person. It's like, I mean, he did murder like 6 people, so I don't know about that. But yeah, the generosity piece for sure.
Yeah.
Obviously, I want it to be meaningful. It's kind of my thing. Podcast is titled Meaning Makers for a reason.
Yeah.
But like a meaningful life is one that, yeah, there was intentional purpose, and that was paired with experiences with other people that impacted them. So, yeah, generous, meaningful, loving in different aspects. I think service is in there, and that's separate from generosity. I think making sure that I was serviceable in what I did. And then having kids, like just preparing my kids for, I heard this quote yesterday that as a dad, when you have a son, at some point you realize you're just training your replacement. Which was like such a weird way to say it, but I was like, man, that's kind of true. Like, he has your last name. He's going to be here, God willing, after you. So that idea of like, I want to make sure that I'm a good coach and a good dad to him and a good trainer, whatever that means, but lift him up in a way to where he's living a better life than I was by the time I leave.
Wow.
So, If he's doing that, we'll see. But that's what I'd want in my obituary. Like, people are better off meeting me and having been in my life because I was impacting
Yeah.
than they were if they weren't in my life.
Yeah.
That kind of sounds conceited, but it also doesn't come from a conceited place. If that makes sense.
Nah, I don't think that sounds you're saying you want other people to be better off because of having been in your life like that. I don't think that's conceited at all. Yeah.
Where do you think our sense of meaning comes from?
Yeah, I do think that you asked me this last time, which makes sense because it's your podcast,
And your answer could be different.
and it, yeah, very well could be. It probably will be to some degree, but yeah, no, I think our meaning, just like this cup of coffee here, it's like the engineer that made this coffee mug that holds its temperature had an intention for it. Like they thought, I want a vessel for a consistently warm cup of coffee over a long period of time. And so that's where the meaning of this coffee was. And then that idea came into form, and it was created. It was made by the engineer who had the intention for this creation. And in the same vein, like where there's a light bulb, there was a person that created light. Where there was drywall, there was someone that thought of the idea for how to, help frame a house and put stuff on it. Like, where there is a creation, there's always a creator. And so I think we, as created beings, no person on earth has ever created themselves. And so I think we take on the image of our creator, and our meaning comes from the one that's made us. Just like this camera and the microphone, like everything that's created has meaning from the one that created it. And so as the person sitting here today, I believe that there is one God that out of his love and creativity, out of his essence, out of his unique attributes, created earth, created people different from everything else, created people different from everything else because he created it like himself. And so I think our meaning comes from God. I think that is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. I think he's the God that created everything, that set everything in motion. I think he's chosen specific people to live out a life of love and peace that is different than some of our natural inclinations. It's his ways that he's just tried to teach us, his creation. And so I think that God eventually came to earth in a unique way in the form of Jesus. And I think that Jesus tried to say, hey, like, look at me, follow me. Like, I'm going to be a continuation of this story that began with Adam, and I'm stepping into it now, and I'm going to show you myself. Try to learn from me, and so yeah, that's the God of the Jews, and it's the God of the Christians, and so that's where I think we get our meaning from is from our Creator, and I think that's a Christian, and I guess a Judeo-Christian God. Yeah. And it's not just like the idea of a Judeo-Christian God, but it's like it is the person who we as Christians follow as Jesus and God the Father and the Holy Spirit. And the Jews follow to some extent as God the Father, with their slight misunderstanding of who God the Son is, and but some of them figure it out eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, God created everything, and he bestowed upon everything a name except the animals. And because we were created, God told us to create because he bestowed upon us a name. He told Adam to bestow names on the animals.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we're called to do, is create and bestow meaning upon the world. Is give these animals a name so we know what to call it, so it has breadth, that it has depth. Go create things, not because it's supposed to look good or sound good, but create it out of the essence that I've created you in, which is why human beings create so many different things. Because, the person that created the camera was different than the microphone, was different than the book that someone wrote. And all these creations come from, here's how God uniquely made you. And out of that uniqueness, you'll create something new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Our ability to create is really unique from all other animals. And at the same time, our ability to rest is unique from all other creations as well. Like I think that those are just two of the biggest things that God wants to teach us, is like how to create enough and how to rest enough. Like knowing when enough is in both our creation and in our rest.
Yeah.
Is, I think, a lesson that God's been trying to teach me for the last couple of years. And I think he's always trying to teach his people that. It's like, yeah, he is enough. We are enough. Yeah, but we've got crazy opportunity and ability, like really an unlimited potential. And God wants that. Like he wants to see us tap into our potential. And he also wants us to trust him, like, trust his story. Know that it's not all about creating. It's also about like enjoying, like resting, not being a slave to work. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this. The difference in humanity and then animals, other creation, is all these animals and everything else created lives out of biological habit. Like I've never seen a chicken decide it's going to think of a new idea. I've never seen a cow or a bird or a monkey think of a new idea. It's all based in biology and based in habit. But human beings, you can think a unique thought that you've never thought before, that you've never been taught, just because of the creativity that God has put in you. And you might see something and you might think, what if I thought about it this way? Or like me, if I go see a movie, I'll think, I think I could have done it that way, or maybe that's a whole new idea that pops into my head. But like no other species does that. Obviously, we don't know if aliens are out there, a hot topic nowadays. But like no other created earthly beings do that. I don't know if that's like an argument for why God exists or whatever, but I just think that's so unique. And how even when we feel like we are not unique and that we're not created for more, we're already up here on the totem pole of species. And we do have the ability to actually think about, what could my life look like if I did this differently?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we can't communicate with animals the way that we maybe would like to, but even the idea that we're thinking about our value relative to other creatures, it's like other creatures aren't thinking about their value relative to us, right? Like there might be moments where like a gorilla's like, I'm just gonna kill you. Like I'm just stronger than you. But they're not thinking about their value relative to us while they're acting.
Yeah.
Whereas like, we're sitting around here trying to answer like, what makes us different, because we can see that we're different. Like we know we're different. It's not just like, oh, we look different, but it's like we do things differently. We have a different capacity, even some of the brightest of animals, because there are some really amazing creatures out there. But like, we know we're different. I think everyone knows that we're different. Knowing why we're different, a little harder to discern. But I even think that our ability to consider that we're different.
Yeah.
Like a gorilla can see that it's different than a person, but like, can it consider its value? I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe
there's something to that soul component that I think is different.
Mm-hmm.
Because even when I think about my dog, like my dog is only as smart as I teach it. Like it already has that biological, like this dog might be able to pick up on things quicker than other dogs.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as its habit goes, like the actual training of the dog depends on the training. Like my dog knows how to sit, lay down, stay, all that stuff because I had to teach it. It didn't instinctively know that. And
Yeah.
humans are similar. But at no point does my dog then think about, well, why am I sitting? What's the purpose of this sit? They just know that if I sit, I'm likely to get a treat.
Yeah.
Or if I sit, I'm likely to do this. They're not thinking, what is the meaning behind this sit? What, why am I even here in this room? Like they live on habit.
Uh-huh.
Humans also live on habit, but we have that metacognition that we can think about. Oh yeah, what is the value, like you've been saying, that's greater here or less than here?
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of reasons why we're different from animals. And, yeah. And I think that's a great one. Yeah, metacognition. Yeah, that belongs in a philosophy book. Or in a meaning maker's book.
Dude, maybe. I don't know about that one. You'll just have to wait and find out. Any words that you live by? Some people have phrases or words that they live by. Do you have any of those?
I'm sure I do to some extent. Like there's plenty of words from scripture that like I want to live by. Whether I do or not, might be a different story. But yeah, I think there are some things that I do come back to consistently. Yeah, I think one way that I guess I'm wired, kind of DNA wise, I think I've kind of thought this way from the beginning, but it's usually people that are going against the grain that wind up getting things right. I think that's written somewhere in my DNA of like, there's something to be said for like consistency and like people that kind of fit in the crowd, or it's like they're good at not ruffling feathers. Like there's plenty of good to be said about doing things that other people do as well. But in terms of those that have really big impact are usually people that are doing things differently. Like the best investors, it's like, or the best, yeah. Usually it's because they've done something pretty unique. They've gone against the grain. When everyone says, the economy's failing, it's like, okay, so are you going to be a person that then stops investing, or are you going to be a person that jumps in? So like, that kind of idea of kind of going against the grain feels a part of my DNA. Like on the Enneagram, I'm a Enneagram 3 wing 2. So I guess that's not explaining why I have a desire for generosity, but it's explaining maybe some of where the generosity comes, like some of the language for the generosity. But on the other side of that, 3 is the Enneagram 4, which is a person that's usually, a little different from the folks that they're around. Yeah. So kind of going against the grain is got a lot of value to it. That's something that I live by, I think.
And that's different than being polarized. So like against the grain, when you say that, I hear that's different than just being like a polarized figure. Like you're not just taking one extreme or the other, but going against the grain just means you're finding your own way. I think in today's society, people hear go against the grain and they think, okay, well, politics going against the grain where I am means that I'm going to be far right in a far left world or far left in a far right world.
Mm-hmm.
But what you said, going against the grain, feels more like I'm just going to do it the way I think is best.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what it probably comes down to. Yeah. Is having a thoughtful intention for why you're doing what you're doing, Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, man. Dude, there's this maybe isn't even a great question for me to be answering for a podcast, because I feel like I could just sit here and just think about it for a long time and maybe not even have a good answer. But But yeah, I know that there's so much, like the Proverbs are so rich of like one quote, sayings where it's like you don't necessarily need to have a whole lot of context with that piece of scripture for it to be really meaningful. And that can be pretty different from the rest of scripture. Like you just need a lot of context to be able to understand like what the author is trying to say about who God is and about who we are. Proverbs has a lot of good one-liners. It's like Proverbs 25:2 is like, it's the glory of God to conceal things and the glory of man to seek things out. Or it really says like the glory of kings to seek things out, but I think he's just kind of meaning like people and maybe even specifically leaders. But like you've got curiosity written on your board there. And that quote just really speaks to curiosity, like having a curious mind about God and about some of those higher things, those things that, maybe don't always have clear answers to them. But I love that proverb. Like it gets me fired up to consider like it is to our glory or to our personal benefit to have a disposition of wonder and curiosity, to have a sense of adventure. So yeah, that's one of my favorite proverbs. I think another one that's really sobering. So I don't know if it's something that like I necessarily live out really well, but I think it's attached to that desire to be generous with my time and efforts and stuff is like that when in scripture, I think it's Matthew. Yeah, I don't remember the chapter, but it's like when Jesus says the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. It's like that is one that always gets me. It's like the one who had all authority, all power, all ability to be, well-liked, wealthy, famous, like he's got all the resources that he would ever want or need. And like there will be a moment when we kind of all recognize that, maybe on the other side of this life, but for him to choose not to be served by the people that he came to save, but to in fact serve them, like that's one that, yeah, it just really speaks to my heart. It's crazy that God would love us like that.
Yeah. It's a good one. One of my favorites is it's never too late to start today. And that can be for anything. It can be for change, for whatever. It's never too late. Another one is you're genuinely really one decision away from changing your life. And that can be just a decision to think differently, a decision to take a step differently, a decision to just walk into the gym. You don't have to work out. Just walk in. A decision to eat this one meal healthy. Like it's always that next decision that matters. So you're always one decision away. Yeah. No matter what.
Like that.
Man, I'm trying to think of other ones. I feel like another quote is ultimate comfort is always on the other side of really hard discomfort. So I want to be comfortable in my own skin, but I also want to be comfortable with how I live. So really it's what is your definition of comfort? But for me, I want to be comfortable in my own skin, which means I want to be fit. I want to be comfortable doing daily activities now and when I'm 70. So what do I have to do? I have to get uncomfortable right now. Yeah. I have to go through hard stuff. I have to work out. I have to give my body that tension it needs to actually feel like, okay, we're actually growing. We're sustaining. We're flourishing. We're not just, again, going and eating Taco Bell and just sitting for 5 hours and hoping my metabolism holds on. You're actually doing hard things to get on the other side of what you actually want. Yeah. So that's a good one.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
One quote I recently said about boundaries to a client was that boundaries aren't there for you to keep other people out. They're there for you to understand how much you can handle. And that's one that I've started to live by, of how can I reframe this to think, how much can I handle? It's not just about like keeping someone at an arm's distance. How much can I handle? And that's how I can continue to live presently, because sometimes I can handle a lot. I'm like, yeah, everyone come on in. Like, let's have a good time. Other times I need to understand that maybe it's keeping people in a certain boundary because I can't handle that right now. And then thinking about, okay, but how can I still love them well while they're in that boundary?
Yeah.
Or while I'm keeping that for myself because right now I'm overwhelmed or I can't handle it. So I don't know if that's really a quote I live by yet, but I'm trying to live by that quote.
Yeah. Yeah. Dude, it'll be interesting to hear what we would say to these questions, you know, in our 40s and in our 50s, God willing, in our 60s. Like, yeah, I wonder what things will be able to be like, yes, I have gotten to live that one out for even longer. Like, we're still in our late 20s, kind of the beginning part of our late 20s. And so there's only so many things that, like, you know, we probably have been able to hold on to for 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
But that's a good question. I like that one.
My goal for when I'm 70 is to say I did more often than I say I wish I did. That I took action and I actually did what I said I would do when I said I would do it. And not thinking I wish I would have done that.
Yeah. Like, what's one of those things where it's like you'll want to have said when you're 70, I'm glad I did that, instead of like, I wish I did that?
Yeah, finishing a book, traveling with my family, being at a place where, you know, finances weren't the overall goal, but they're in a place where I can be generous and I can actually invest and do the things that I want to do. Another thing would be I did spend more time with my kids than I worked. And I did incorporate my family in my work. I think so much like people just separate those things. And maybe like the on-screen stuff is separate. But what I see a shift in some of the people I follow on social media is like their kids are always in the background. Or their kids are being incorporated or their family's being incorporated somehow. Because they're like, I want to do this. This is my passion. This is my drive. But I don't want to miss time with them. So how do I incorporate them? Or at least have them around so right when the camera's off, I can go hang out with them. As opposed to that mentality of, got to keep it separate. I need to make sure that I'm like focused on work. Yeah. You could be focused and also still spend time with them. It doesn't have to be either or. So that's something I hope I can say I did. Man, another thing, I mean, I did live meaningfully. I didn't just talk about it and wish I would. I actually did.
Yeah.
There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot that I probably haven't even thought of yet that I'll get to the point where I'm like, I did that. That's cool.
Yeah. That one about work with like kind of incorporating your kids, I think that's cool. Because I really don't think that's a desire that everyone wants to have. Like, I think people kind of want it to be like, you know, I do my job and then I get to set it aside and like, I get to come home and be with my kids and my family and then it's like, you know, full attention there. And then it's like when you leave, it's like you leave all of your family and you're at home and then you go to your job. And like, I think that there's maybe that should be true to some extent. Like maybe a doctor shouldn't have their kids in a patient room during surgery.
Yeah.
But for someone that's entrepreneurial, you know, but goes back to that idea that you said earlier of like, I guess with your son, probably more specifically than with your daughter, but you're training your replacement. That is such a, in my head, that sounds very old fashioned, like, or almost more ancient. Like we just don't often in our society like have that sort of intention. You know, there's just less and less people like kind of working for the family business, even if they're like wasn't a family business, but just kind of less intentional teaching. It's like, yeah, YouTube will teach to the next generation. They'll figure it out through YouTube. But that's cool that you have a desire to have your family and work kind of not be segmented like that, but to be able to, you know, balance those things and kind of weave things together where it's like your heart is both for your family and your work. Like your work is not independent of your passions. You know, I think that's cool. I don't think everyone has that desire. Yeah,
that's got me thinking, well, two thoughts. It'll go two different directions. One, is it's kind of like the Mr. Rogers story of how whenever they did like the whole documentary on him, and they kind of talked about his kids were like, I didn't feel like he was Mr. Rogers to me. Like all these other kids got Mr. Rogers, but I didn't feel like my dad was my dad. And there's that sense of his relationship with his kids was kind of rifted because his work was separate and different. And there's probably a lot more complexity there. But whenever his kids were talking about it, they were saying, and, you know, for lack of energy, time, whatever, they felt like he gave more to other people than to them sometimes. And maybe that wasn't his intention at all. But that's where I'm trying not to be. Is not being that, man, I wish I would have just like gave them more time and attention. Like I want to find a balance. And if I don't find the balance, work is secondary. And that's just how it's going to be.
Yeah.
And then societally, we can see it with the whole Harrison Butker situation now. He gives a commencement speech about his faith, about how his wife loves being a homemaker, blows up. About now he's a misogynist. He's whatever the words people were saying about him. And I think it's such a shift for people to think that caring about family and living into your created really biological purpose as a male and a female is somehow this disgusting and something to be disdained. And I don't know, you may not have any thoughts about that or share any thoughts about it, but I just think that that's a shift where, yeah, people don't think that family should be this big focus of your life. Like you have a family, cool. But really, in ancient times, it was like your family is it. Like you have a vocation, you have a job, but your family is the most important thing. And we see that in other cultures too. Like I think Hispanic cultures are awesome at it. They're like, we go to work, but at the end of the day, like family is everything. And I know a few people from Brazil, same thing in Brazil. It's like family is everything. Like we have a job, cool. We're making impact in our job, great. But family is still everything. And a lot of them try to incorporate their family into their jobs or they have family businesses. But in America, it seems like there's almost a shift towards maybe there's a piece of society that doesn't think family is important. And there's this piece that thinks it is the most important. And right now they're butting heads. Seen clearly with this Harrison Butker situation. Because, I mean, it's tens of millions of views and millions of comments on it. So, but yeah, it's like where family values meet work and supposed what you should be doing. It's really colliding. And I just think, my own opinion and my own faith, like, I don't care what you do as a job. Like, if my wife wants to stay at home, awesome. If my wife wants to go work full time, awesome. But when you have a family, you have to think about what is best for our family, what is best for our kids. And that situation is different from everyone. But there seems to be this longing in this call that my wife has to say, these are my kids. I want to raise them. I want to be the one to teach them in the ways that I want them to be taught. And then I have a calling to say, I love my family. I want to incorporate them. But I also want to go conquer big mountains. Like, I want to go fight the bear. I want to go chase the lion.
Yeah.
She doesn't necessarily have that calling, but I do. And that's a great balance.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really clear. And yeah, having an intention to consider like how you're wired and how your wife is wired, where you guys can both bring your unique strengths to the table. So it's like there's that individual autonomy, and you're not just bringing the strengths to the table for yourself, like not just for Keegan, but like also for your wife, and not just for you and your wife, but also for your two kids. Like, yeah, that sounds pretty ideal to me. It's one thing if you had a particular strength and Hannah was just like, Keegan, I don't care. I don't care that that's a strength of yours. Like, I want you to be doing this for me. Like, you know, something that's actually good. Like a good strength of yours. And so if she was saying that to you or vice versa, if you were like, Hannah, no, you don't need to ever work. Like, you might have a desire to have this ability to take care of people in the hospital really well, but like you should never do that because I want you to slave away at home. And if she's like, what? Like, but that's not like, I've got this passion for taking care of people and for teaching our kids. Like, yeah, you guys living into that. It's not just for yourselves, but it's also for your kids and having that outward look as well, for your family, like considering it. Yeah, it's just not about you. It seems pretty ideal to me. And I think there are lots of ways for that to look in a family. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not just, yeah. People really like to get into a lane and think like, oh, everyone needs to do it my way. Like every Republican family that calls themselves a Christian, it's got to look like this certain structure. And on the other side, like every liberal family on the other side has to look like this. And if we ever look like them, then, what are we doing? And vice versa. It's like, that's just not helpful way to think. It's not actually intentional. It's not really considering the individual.
Yeah. I always care more about data-driven decisions than I do about whether you're Republican, Democrat, whatever. And one thing I really like about Jonathan Haidt, I don't know if you've read any of his books, but he has a ton of books out there. And some are about happiness. Some are about, I think he just released one about anxiety. Like, why are we so anxious? And he's like, I don't care who you are. Here's the raw data of it all. And here's the issues that we see popping up in the data. And one thing when it comes to family is we know based on data that when the family nucleus is broken, the community is also broken, bar none. When communities have less rates of the dad being there, less rates of, or more rates of divorce, it's like typically the community also is not doing well. And the values and the crime is up, the values are down. So like, what do we do with the data to then inform our decisions of how do I then live to make sure that I'm making my little world a better place? And not everyone thinks like that. And I think that then the government gets involved and that's always messy. But as someone who's a critical thinker, and if someone wants to be a critical thinker, it's how do I look at the data? How does that align with how I'm living? And how does it align with my values? And where do those merge to where I can then decide how I want to live? And I think that with family, I don't care if you have faith or not. But if it's clearly shown that people thrive and flourish in an environment where there are two parents, where the community is a safer community, where people have values, then like, why would we not strive for that?
Yeah.
But people are sinful. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have all the answers, but.
Yeah. Yeah, me neither.
Any parting thoughts?
No, man. I think this is good stuff. Thinking about meaning. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for some words that I held on to. Maybe if might be thinking about that over the next couple days. Are there any specific things that I like to live by? Because I think that'd just be good for myself to even kind of organize a little better. I think there's a lot of inspiration to hold on to. But yeah, I like that question a lot.
Yeah, I haven't gone this far, but some families have their like, here's our family tenets. Here's our family values.
Yeah.
Haven't gone that far yet, but yeah, you're right. It's good to know and have, because at the very least it anchors you into what and why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got some friends that did that. They've got maybe like 7 or 8 family tenants. Just a husband and wife right now. And the husband, as a gift for his wife, had taken some wood from a friend of ours who had a tree fall down, like took some wood from that, chopped it up, sanded it, wrote on it, stained it, and they're like, about the size of a dinner plate. Some of them may be a little smaller, but it looks really cool as a really creative way for him to like use his strengths of working with his hands, and then put it on something cool that they can hold on to and use as decoration and stuff like that. And like, I really admire that. So maybe that's one thing that when I'm 70, I hope that I will be able to look back and say like, oh, I did that type of exercise at least once, you know, even if it changes over time. Actually, I think that's something I've heard a couple of people do is like having maybe not like a family mission statement. I don't know that I would go that far quite yet. Maybe I would eventually, but at least having a couple of tenets or rules to live by would be really cool. Yeah.
Man, this was fun.
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about real estate investing either.
Yeah, hardly. Yeah.
Man.
It was good.
That means we'll probably have to do another one.
Yeah.
All about real estate investing.
Dude. Yeah, we absolutely can. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on.
Yeah. Bye.